Hello everyone and welcome back to Mathematics with Usman. Today I am going to discuss with you people the most dreaded topic of mathematics, and the topic is the probability. Dear students, the term probability is actually the game of chances and the game of uncertainties, and in mathematics it is defined as the numerical description of how likely an event is to occur, which means that what are the chances of an event to occur in numbers. And the mathematical formula that we have to use in order to find the probability of any event A is equals to the ratio of the favorable outcomes to the ratio of total possible outcomes of an event. Let us begin our discussion of probability with its basic fundamentals. Students, just consider a simple event. If a fair coin is flipped in the air, what do you think? What are the possible outcomes? If a coin is flipped in the air, there are two possible outcomes. One is heads and the other is tails, provided the coin is fair. Now, if we consider an event, what is the possibility or the probability of occurrence of heads? Students, you can see that there are two outcomes which are possible, and our favorable outcome is the occurrence of the head. So there is one favorable outcome which is heads, and there are two possible outcomes which are head and tail. And the probability, if we need to find for this event, will be equals to the possible outcomes, which is 1, only the occurrence of head, over the total number of possible outcomes, which are 2. So the probability of occurrence of head is equals to 1:2. Students, this is the simple event and it is very easy to calculate. However, there can be events that are combined. For example, if we consider another example of the same coin, but now it is flipped in the air not once but 2 times, then students, we can represent this information in 3 different ways. I will arrange them in sort of the order of their complexities, so that you have the better visualization of the probabilities of this simple combined event. You not only flipping it in the air, but you should know what is happening behind. Number 1, it is called the list of the possibilities, or in other words, you can say it the sample space, all the possible events. And the sample space for this particular event will be equals to, we can have head on the first and head on the second. So it can be headed, we can have tail on the first and tail on the second. So tail, tail. And number 3, we can have head on the first and tail on the second, or simply tail on the first and head on the second. So there are 4 possible outcomes: head, head, head on the first, head on the second, tail on the first, tail on the second, head on the first but tail on the second, and similarly tail on the first and head on the second. So total possible outcomes are 4, and we name it the sample space, the simplest of the method to represent the information. Number 2, students, it is called the dot diagram. In the dot diagram, we will have 2 axes. Number 1, the horizontal axis, and number 2, the vertical axis, in which both of these, one information will be provided in the vertical direction and one in the horizontal direction. In the vertical direction, you can see that, students, the outcomes of the coin 1 are represented, heads and the tails. Similarly, on the horizontal axis, the outcomes of the second flip are represented, H and T. Now students, as the name suggests here, dots are drawn. Here is the first dot, here is the second dot, here is the third, and this one is the fourth. And you can also write this is representing, you will go horizontally, which is H, and vertically, which is H as well. So this dot represents head, this represents heads and a tail, this represents tail and a head, and the last one represents tails and tails. You can see students here, our options are limited. Since we are only having only two dimensions. So what if we have to throw the same coin 3 times in a row? Then we are already out of the money for this dot diagram. So what we need the third option. And the third option is the simplest of all, branches. The tree diagram or the probability tree diagram, in which we have the branches like this. When you are flipping the coin in the air for the first time, you have got 2 options. Number 1, it is the head. Number 2, it is the tail. Now, for the second flip, if we get the head on the first, for the second flip, we are having 2 chances. It can be head and it can be a tail on the second coin. Now, we are not sure we will get the head on the first. We can have the tail on the first. So again, we are having 2 options for it. First is having the tail, and the second can have head and a tail. Now, if you move along the branches, this first branch, it represents head and neck. The second branch, this one, it represents head and tail. The third one, it represents tail and head. And the last one, both the coins are representing the tails. Students, since I have wrote a word probability diagram, so you must know what is the product rule for the probability tree diagram. Let us consider a simple event in which we have to find the probability of getting both heads. We must have the head on the first coin, we must have the head on the second coin. And students, you can see clearly here on the first branch, this one, we are having head and head. So this is suiting our cause. So what we have to do, we will simply see the probability of the first head, it is 1/2. We will see the probability of the second head, it is again 1/2, and we have to multiply them. This is known as the product rule. This is a different product rule. Make sure you don't mix it with the product rule that we have read in calculus and differentiation. Students, there is another rule in probability, and that is the addition rule. For example, if you are asked to find the probability of finding one head and one tail in the same situation. If you are asked to find the probability of the head on one of the coin and tail on the second coin, there are 2 different branches that are satisfying this condition. Look at this, we are getting head on the first and second tail on the second. So this is the first branch that you have to consider, and there is another branch which can satisfy this given condition, that is getting the tail on the first and head on the second. So students, you can see that the probability of getting the head and the tail and the probability of getting the tail on the first and head on the second, they are both satisfying the given scenario. Now we have to find the probability of getting a head and a tail, which is this branch of the tree, 1/2 probability of getting a head, 1/2 probability of getting a tail. So you have to multiply them along the branch. Now there is the second branch, which is getting a tail on the first coin and getting a head on the second coin, and you again have to multiply their probabilities because they are along the branch. However, students, for fulfilling the condition of getting a head and a tail, you have to apply the addition rule. And what is that? If two different branches are satisfying the condition, then you have to add the probabilities of both. That is, you have, for this particular event, you have to add the probabilities of having a head and a tail and tail and a head. Now, by applying simple algebraic rule, you can simplify them. 1 by 2 into 1 by 2 will give you 1 by 4, and 1 by 2 into 1 by 2 will give you 1 by 4. Now you can add them. We get 4 as an LCM. 1 plus 1 will give you 2. If you simplify it into the simplest form, you will get 1 over 2. And this brings us to the end of today's tutorial. Students, I hope it will have some value to your mathematical concepts. As always, thank you very much for watching Mathematics with Usman. See you in another tutorial. Have yourself a productive week.